Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Munib Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines first. In Pakistan, 7 soldiers have been martyred in an exchange of fire with terrorists in Balochistan. The military's media wing said the gun battle took place when the terrorists raided a Frontier Corps checkpost. It said anti-state forces will not be allowed to sabotage hard-earned peace in Balochistan. In a tweet, Prime Minister Imran Khan said the whole nation stands with brave soldiers who face attacks from the Indian-backed terrorists. In Afghanistan, the government claims to have killed 11 Al-Qaeda fighters in multiple airstrikes in Helmand Nawaz district. According to the Defense Ministry, 2 Taliban commanders were also killed in the strikes. Meanwhile, Pakistan's Foreign Office has expressed deep concerns over the growing violence in Afghanistan. In India, 2 protesting farmers have died of cardiac arrest at Delhi borders in the past 24 hours. Meanwhile, union leaders have agreed on a fresh round of talks with the centre on Tuesday, but say they will hold a tractor march and step up agitation if the government does not discuss the repeal of laws. Braving harsh cold, farmers have camped against contentious agricultural reforms for over a month now. In Cameroon, at least 40 people have been killed after a bus crashed into a truck in the western part of the country. Local officials say 18 people sustained injuries in the accident. The death toll may rise as the rescue operation is underway. The European Union is launching a coordinated vaccine rollout to fight COVID-19 and protect nearly 450 million people. Meanwhile, Canada is the latest country to report cases of the new variant first detected in the UK. In Pakistan, the virus has claimed 58 lives and infected more than 1,800 people overnight. The nationwide death toll has risen to 9,874. Globally, there are 1.7 million fatalities and over 80 million infections. And in the English Premier League, Leeds United have bounced back from their defeat at Old Trafford with a 1-0 victory over Burnley at Allen Road. Patrick Bamford scored for an early penalty to earn Leeds their 3rd home win of the season. Victory for the hosts lifts them into 11th place in the league, while Burnley remain 16th. These were the headlines. News in detail coming up after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now let's have the news in detail. We'll start from Pakistan, where 7 soldiers have been martyred in an exchange of fire with terrorists in Balochistan. The military's media wing said the gun battle took place when the terrorists raided a Frontier Corps checkpost. It said anti-state forces will not be allowed to sabotage hard-earned peace in Balochistan. The security forces have launched a large-scale search operation to apprehend terrorists on the run. Prime Minister Imran Khan has condemned the incident and offered condolences to the families of the martyred soldiers. He said the whole nation stands with soldiers who face attacks from Indian-backed terrorists. Islamabad has repeatedly pointed to India's involvement in terrorist activities in Balochistan and other areas of the country. It has earlier presented a dossier containing details of India's state sponsorship of terrorism. Now, for more on this, we have with us Major General Retired Ijaz Awan. Sir, thank you very much for being with us. Now, Mr. Awan, Prime Minister Khan has repeatedly drawn the world's attention to India's backing of terrorism in Pakistan. Why is the international community remaining silent on India's consistent provocations?
Look, let's be very straight. In a realpolitik, world looks after, or the powerful countries in the world, they look after their own interest. Unfortunately, their strategic interest, and particularly American strategic interest and Western strategic interest in general, are coinciding with with India, as the Secretary of State the other day said, Mike Pompeo in India, that our strategic interest and because of shared values, we will support India in the times to come. Now, when the strategic interests are coinciding, they would look the other way, and we should not expect, or Imran Khan should not expect, that they are going to put sanctions on India, or the economic sanction, military sanctions, or any kind of pressure is going to come on from United Nations onto India for resolution of Kashmir conflict or stopping the terrorism in our country. Well, if at all it comes, it will be mild enough that India can just shrug it off. This is how I see it.
Right, Mr. Avan. Also tell us, what options do you think Pakistan could exercise if India goes ahead with its nefarious designs?
I would say a trilateral movement, and that is in the field of diplomacy and politics, one, as we are doing. We have given our dossiers to United Nations and to the world powers, and we are doing it politically, making the world aware, and luckily, the Disinfo Lab has helped us a lot in discrediting India, what they are doing in Pakistan. So Kalboshan-like things and evidence that we have submitted in the dossiers, one is that prong, we should pursue it. The other is defensive prong within the country, gear up your intelligence agencies, fight out the terrorism in your country. And the third one, which I very strongly recommend, is give a befitting response to India. I personally feel if 5 people fall in Karachi, 5 must fall in Bombay the next day. That's the only way that we must respond to India. Otherwise, India will keep doing it, and international powers are not going to stop India.
Absolutely. Thank you, Major General Retired Ijaz Avan, for joining us on Indus News. Now, Pakistan has expressed its deep concerns over the growing violence in Afghanistan. In a statement, the Foreign Office said the Afghan government must fulfill its responsibility of ensuring the safety of its civilians. The Foreign Office also reaffirmed Islamabad's commitment to peace in the war-torn country. It said Pakistan believes there is no military solution to the Afghan conflict and a political process is the only way forward. Violence in the country has risen significantly despite the two sides being engaged in peace talks. Prime Minister Imran Khan has repeatedly called for reduction in violence in Afghanistan. Now, Azad Jammu and Kashmir President Sardar Masood Khan has called on India to stop the use of force against Kashmiris. In a statement, he demanded India to pay attention to the legitimate call for the right to self-determination. He urged India to resolve the Kashmir conflict per the aspirations of people of the valley. Khan expressed grave concerns over India's torture against thousands of Kashmiri youth in jails. He urged the United Nations and other rights groups to ensure the release of these youth and political prisoners. Now, in India, 2 protesting farmers have died of cardiac arrest at Delhi borders in the past 24 hours. Braving harsh cold, farmers have camped against contentious agricultural reforms for over a month now. Meanwhile, union leaders have agreed on a fresh round of talks with the centre on Tuesday, but say they will hold a tractor march and step up agitation if the government does not discuss the repeal of laws. So far, 5 rounds of talks between the protesting unions and the government have failed. In another development, farmers from Uttar Pradesh are heading to New Delhi to join the demonstrations. Now we are joined by Wajid Khan, a member of United Kingdom's House of Lords and the Mayor of Burnley. Mr. Majid, welcome. It's been over a month now and thousands of farmers have been staging sit-ins against the farm laws, but the government did not respond to their demands. So why do you think Prime Minister Modi is showing such an insensitive attitude towards the farmers?
First of all, it's difficult to state what's going on in Prime Minister Modi's mind. I'm here sat in the United Kingdom, and I have colleagues such as Preet Kaur Gill and Tandesi MPs who have raised this issue with the relevant Foreign Secretary and the Development Secretaries to make sure that the right of democracy, the fundamental right of democracy, is to protest. And if the laws seem to be damaging to the people of the country and farmers. There's a lot of strong families and huge population in the farming sector, and I think it's absolutely fair for them to go out there and protest and register their disconcern about these new laws, which potentially, in their view, could end up making them less well off and having an adverse effect on their future. It's a huge issue, food security. It's fair that we need to understand this in a sustainable manner, but it seems to me the laws that are coming out are not favouring the farmers itself. It's having an adverse effect on them, and it's actually helping the wider the corporate sector, the big business, and that means that the wealth unequal distribution is going to be more stronger. People will get richer and poor will get poorer, and that's what the main fundamental underpinning of the protest is about.
Right, Mr. Wajid, also at the time when India is mired in an internal instability, it has intensified its atrocities in the occupied Kashmir Valley. Don't you think that Prime Minister Modi's policies are leading India to the path of self-destruction? Yeah, on Kashmir, there's no, everyone knows about my views. Never kept quiet about my views about Kashmir. It's not rocket science to say, look, I've always advocated for the ending of human rights abuses, not violations, abuses. There's a difference between violations and abuses, and for the Kashmiri people to determine their own future. And I think it's a sad state of affairs when the world is in lockdown. However, the Kashmir's lockdown has been far before our lockdown. So they've been struggling in this persecution since August 2019 in terms of lockdown, and an even further persecution over 70 years historically. It's a sad state of affairs. It's a right for a good country, democracy, to listen to their constituents, their residents, their citizens, and it's absolutely wrong to perpetrate violence and kill your own citizens. It's not in any good democracy, that kind of behavior. And the lesson is that how much have we learned from our history in the sense that human rights abuses and potential genocides could be taking place as we speak now. And if the world needs to open its eyes and not be turning a blind eye to what's happening in the Indian administered Kashmir region, in particular in relation to them atrocities. However, unfortunately, this BJP-led administration and PM Modi's leadership and RSS-inspired ideology is bringing the reputation down for a great country. And I want to see India thrive, just as I want to see Pakistan thrive and the whole South Asian region thrive. I want India and Pakistan to look at France and Germany in relation to wars in 1945, 1919. So these are examples, living examples for a country to learn from. However, India, from my analysis under this leadership, are trying to make an international issue, not just unilateral. They've said no to multilateralism. They've said no to bilateralism with Pakistan, and now they're just trying to say, well, it's our country, we can do what we want. It's a unilateral issue. That's not good enough. The international community will not stand for that. So PM Modi, you cannot perpetrate violence on your people, as we are seeing in different parts of India, and of course in Indian Kashmir. This is not acceptable, and there's going to come a time where the uprising, and there'll be enough people, good men and women, who will be mobilized and also do whatever they can to stop these abuses taking place. We want to see a successful country, a thriving country, one of the world's biggest democracies, but you need to behave like a democracy. Unfortunately, under the leadership of PM Modi, it's bringing India as a country downwards, and it's ruining its reputation. Absolutely, India should behave like a democracy. Thank you very much, Lord Wajid Khan, for joining us. It's time for a short break on Indus News. Stay tuned. Welcome back now. Moving on with the news stories. Bangladesh is set to move 1,000 more Rohingya refugees to the remote island of Bhasan Char in the Bay of Bengal this month. Dhaka relocated more than 1,600 earlier despite calls from rights groups. A deputy government official in charge of the refugees says the relocation is voluntary. He says the move will ease chronic overcrowding in camps that are home to more than 1 million Rohingya. But humanitarian workers say some of the refugees have been coerced into going to the flood-prone island. The United Nations said it was not allowed to carry out a safety assessment of the island and not involved in the transfers. Moving on, Turkey says Khalifa Haftar's army and supporters will be considered legitimate targets if they attack its forces. Defence Minister Hulusi Akar was speaking to Turkish troops during a visit to Tripoli. Akar said Ankara will target Haftar's men and allies everywhere and they will have nowhere left to run. This comes after the Libyan National Army commander threatened to attack Ankara's forces deployed in Libya. Turkey backs the government of national accord, which has been fighting the Libyan National Army for years. It recently extended the mandate of Turkish forces deployed in the country by 18 months. Also, Turkey says its military has killed 15 militants from the Syrian Kurdish YPG militia. The Defense Ministry says the group was preparing an attack in northeast Syria. Following its Peace Spring operation last year, Turkey seized a 120-kilometer stretch of border territory in northeast Syria from the YPG. Turkey halted its offensive after striking deals with Russia and the United States. Moscow has said the YPG withdrew to at least 30 kilometers from Turkey's border. But Ankara has remained skeptical and held out the possibility of new attacks if militants remain. Now in Israel, thousands of Israelis took to the streets against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. The country is facing protests over his corruption charges and coronavirus handling for over 6 months now. The crowd rallied outside his official residence, blowing whistles, waving signs and flags and calling for his resignation. Several dozen demonstrators also clashed with the police. Protesters were forcibly evacuated by officers and 3 people were also arrested. Other protests took place throughout the country at plazas, intersections and highway overpasses. Israel faces the 4th election in 2 years after Netanyahu's fractured ruling coalition failed to pass a budget. Now in the UK, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has vowed to focus on levelling up the country after securing the post-Brexit trade deal. In an interview, Johnson said the deal will provide new legislative and regulatory freedoms. Johnson added that big changes were coming and it was now the time to seize the opportunity of Brexit. He said his government has a very clear agenda to use this moment to unite and spread opportunity. Johnson said with animal welfare, data and chemicals were areas where the UK could diverge from the European Union standards. But fishermen's leaders have accused him of caving in and sacrificing their interest to reach the agreement. Lawmakers will vote on the deal in Parliament on 30th of December. Meanwhile, in the Central African Republic, people are voting to elect a new president and parliament amid threats and escalating violence. The government is trying to hold off a rebel advance on the capital, Bangui. Heavy gunfire was reported early on Sunday in the town of Boar, around 435 kilometers northwest of Bangui. Ahead of the polls, 3 UN peacekeepers were killed by unidentified combatants. President Faustin Archange Touadera is considered the favorite in the poll of 17 candidates. His main challenger is Anicet George, a former prime minister who finished runner-up in 2016. The election will go to a second round if no candidate receives more than 50% of the votes. Now, in Venezuela, the opposition-held National Assembly has approved a statute extending its term into 2021. The vote paves way for opposition leader Juan Guaido to retain his position as Parliament Speaker. The statute provides for a small group of legislators to carry out the National Assembly's functions. Juan Guaido says the Parliament will continue to work despite threats from the dictatorial regime. The move follows a disputed election in December in which pro-Maduro allies won 91% of the seats in the Congress. 4 major opposition parties in the South American country boycotted the election, alleging fraud. The socialist-controlled Congress is scheduled to be sworn in on January 5. More news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now moving on with the news stories. The European Union is launching a coordinated vaccine rollout to fight COVID-19 and protect nearly 450 million people. Meanwhile, Canada is the latest country to report cases of the new variant first detected in the UK. Globally, there are over 80 million infections and 1.7 billion fatalities. More on coronavirus in this report.
As the hopes of vaccine rollout provided some relief to people, new variants of the virus have created confusion and panic at the same time. In the US, scientists are analyzing the test results in California to see if the new strain has emerged in the country. Meanwhile, in Latin America, the second shipment of Pfizer vaccines has arrived in Mexico. And the World Health Organization says COVID-19 will not be the last pandemic the world witnesses.
History tells us that this will not be the last pandemic, and epidemics are a fact of life. But with investments in public health, supported by an all-of-government, all-of-society, One Health approach, we can ensure that our children and their children inherit a safer, more resilient, and more sustainable world.
In Europe, infections linked to the people who arrived from the UK were reported in Spain, Switzerland, Sweden and France. More areas across England have been placed under Tier 4 restrictions to curb the mutant virus, while Japan is set to ban most non-resident foreign nationals from entering the country for a month from Monday. Australia's largest city, Sydney, will find out early next week whether it will be allowed any public New Year celebrations.
The Northern Beaches community, can I thank you again for your patience. I appreciate frustration levels will be increasing as we get closer to New Year's Eve and as the days of stay-at-home increase. We hope to have some clear information to everybody tomorrow or at the latest the day after on what New Year's Eve and the next few weeks look like for everybody, including those communities on the Northern Beaches.
Elsewhere in Asia, China has reported 10 new imported cases and 12 locally transmitted infections on the mainland. South Korea's daily COVID-19 cases fell below 1,000 as the country struggles to contain the virus.
Now, US President-elect Joe Biden has urged President Donald Trump to sign the $2.3 trillion COVID aid and spending package. In a statement, Biden described Trump's refusal to sign the bill as an abdication of responsibility.
Biden said the bill was critical and needed to be signed into law immediately. He warned of devastating consequences if Trump continues to delay signing the bill into law. Calling the bill a disgrace, President Trump refused to sign it into law and asked the Congress for amendment. In a tweet, Trump said he simply wanted people to get $2,000 rather than the measly $600. The Labor Department's data shows around 14 million people will be affected if the president does not sign the bill. It will also trigger a partial government shutdown starting from Tuesday. Millions of government workers risk losing their incomes if Congress fails to agree to a stopgap funding bill before then.
Now, in Pakistan, 58 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours. This pushes the country's death toll to 9,874. Health officials reported 1,853 new infections overnight. Meanwhile, there are more than 39,000 active cases in the country. The Health Ministry says out of over 471,000 countrywide cases, more than 422,000 people have recovered. It says over 210,000 cases have been detected in Sindh province. Punjab has reported more than 135,000 cases. In the capital, Islamabad, over 37,000 have been infected so far. Now, Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, Munir Akram, says the world must unite in its fight against COVID-19. Akram, who also heads the UN Economic and Social Council president, said this on the International Day of Epidemic Preparedness. Akram urged the world to ensure adequate financial resources against epidemics. He said our response towards all epidemics must be of solidarity and international cooperation, and everyone should have access to vaccines. Meanwhile, in his message, the World Health Organization Director General said we all must learn the lessons the pandemic is teaching us. Tedros said all nations should invest in preparedness, capacities and strong primary health care. Now moving to Cameroon, where at least 40 people have been killed after a bus crashed into a truck in the western village of Nemali. The 70-seater bus was on its way to the capital Yaoundé from the western town of Foumban when the accident happened. Local officials say 18 people sustained injuries in the incident. The death toll may rise as rescue workers dig through the wreckage. Now, in the U.S. state of Illinois, police have arrested a suspect after 3 people were killed in a shooting at a bowling alley in Rockford. The nighttime incident left 3 others injured. Talking to media, Rockford Police Chief Dan O'Shea said the investigation is still going on. O'Shea said the motive of the shooting was not clear yet, and investigators describe it as a random attack.
Responding officers came to the scene. Calls were coming in. There was multiple victims. At this point, it's still an ongoing investigation. We do have 3 individuals that are confirmed deceased. We also have 3 confirmed other individuals that have received gunfire and are being treated at local hospitals. At this point, we have a person of interest in custody.
Now, in the U.S. state of Tennessee, federal agents are investigating over 500 leads and looking at charge sites of yesterday's explosion in Nashville. Talking to reporters, FBI Special Agent in charge, Doug Korneski, said investigators were working to identify what appeared to be human remains amid the wreckage. Korneski did not say if the remains belonged to the person behind what officials called an intentional act. He said the authorities were looking at a number of individuals in possible connection to the incident. Korneski added FBI Quantico was also taking part in the investigation. The explosion at a motorhome left 3 people injured on Christmas Day.
We can't confirm any individuals or anybody we've identified. Again, as we've mentioned, we have over 500 investigative leads, and we're following up on every one of those. So there are a number of individuals that we're looking at. So at this point, we're not prepared to identify any single individual.
Now, archaeologists in Pompeii, the city buried in volcanic eruption in 79 AD, have made an extraordinary finding. They dug up a frescoed shop that served of the ancient equivalent of street food to Roman passers-by. More about the discovery in this report.
Archaeologists have made yet another interesting discovery in the ancient city of Pompeii. Known as Thermopolium, Latin for hot drinks counter, the shop was discovered in the Archaeological Park's Regio 5 site. Traces of nearly 2,000-year-old food were found in some of the deep terracotta jars. It contained hot food, which the shopkeeper lowered into a counter with circular holes.
This is an extraordinary find. We are in the Thermopolium of Regio 5, where excavations began 2 years ago, when we found only one side of the counter, a very beautiful counter by the way, with a nymph riding a horse. Maybe this fresco was dedicated to a nearby fountain, because this Thermopolium was placed in front of a small square, one of the most beautiful squares of Pompeii.
The front of the counter was decorated with brightly colored frescoes. Some depict animals that were part of the ingredients in the food sold, such as a rooster and 2 ducks hanging upside down. Archaeologists also found a decorated bronze drinking bowl known as a petera. They also dug up ceramic jars used for cooking stews and soups, wine flasks, and an amphora and some bones.
Now we can start the analysis. The material inside the container to know their content, what type of food was solid, and what passers-by in Pompeii could buy, drink, food. A truly extraordinary evidence of the Mediterranean diet that we will know soon.
Pompeii was home to about 13,000 people when it was buried under ash, pumic pebbles, and dust. It endured the force of an eruption equivalent to many atomic bombs. About 2/3 of the 165-acre ancient town has been uncovered.
Now, amid a pandemic, a CHOLITA woman is lighting up the long hours of wait for her clients at a hair salon in El Alto, Bolivia. Find out how in this report.
The coronavirus pandemic has ruined people's lives in different ways. But despite all this, hairdresser Gladys Espejo welcomes her clients by dancing to the traditional music of the Cholitas. She wears the traditional high bowler hat and puffed skirt. Espejo makes a difference by being the only Cholita woman to offer styling and hairdressing services in the outskirts of La Paz.
My story begins with my grandfather because he made a foray into the art of hairdressing. Later, my father became a hairdresser 30 years ago, and I learned to cut men's hair because I cut my father's hair.
In recent years, Bolivia's Cholitas are imposing new fashion and beauty standards in a country where they were once routinely stereotyped and discriminated against after being considered maids of the middle classes.
A great majority of my clients are Cholitas who participate in different beauty contests. This makeup is important when the Cholitas show up to these events and want to win a title. Without a doubt, good makeup can cause a visual impact.
The Cholitas hail from rural Aymara and Quechua communities. For generations, they were denied entry to certain restaurants, taxis, and even some public buses.
Now in Russia, thousands of lights have illuminated the capital Moscow ahead of New Year celebrations. State media says 1,000 Christmas trees were lit and 4,000 installations set up for this holiday season. With endless decorations and lights lining its streets, Moscow transforms into a winter fairy tale during the holidays each year. This year, despite the coronavirus restrictions, a huge crowd gathered to admire the lights. Around the capital's famous landmarks, including Red Square, the Kremlin and the world-famous Bolshoi Theatre. The famous gum department store has also been decked out with extravagant decorations both inside and out. Now, Pakistan's trade with African countries has increased by 7% this year. Advisor to Prime Minister on Commerce Abdul Razak Dawood says trade rose to $4.18 billion in 2019-20. Dawood said this was a result of Pakistan's Look Africa campaign. In an interview, he said Pakistan will participate in the International Khartoum Fair for the first time next year. The advisor said Islamabad will hold the Pakistan-Africa Trade Development Conference in Kenya next month. Sports news coming up in this bulletin after a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now, in the English Premier League, Leeds United have bounced back from their defeat at Old Trafford with a 1-0 victory over Burnley at Allen Road. Patrick Bamford scored from an early penalty to earn Leeds their third home win of the season. Victory for the hosts lifts them into 11th place in the league, while Burnley remain 16th. In yesterday's encounter, Arsenal beat Chelsea 3-1 to end their 7-game run without a win, while Manchester City easily dispatched Newcastle United 2-0 at home. Liverpool manager Jurgen Klopp says he won't force Mohamed Salah to stay in the team against his will. Salah recently told a newspaper he was disappointed not to be captain at FC Midtjylland when Trent Alexander-Arnold was made skipper. The 28-year-old Egypt international also refused to rule out of a move to Real Madrid or Barcelona. Klopp said Salah's comments about the Spanish sides were not an indication of his desire to leave Liverpool.
But you cannot force people to stay. But that's it. We never did, by the way. It's all about timing, the right moment, stuff like this. We make changes and bring players in. If a player wants to go, then we cannot probably not hold him back. It's just about wouldn't understand why somebody would want to go.
Well, Salah took his tally to 13 top-flight goals this season and helped make sure Liverpool were top at Christmas for a third season in a row. Now, in League One, Nantes have appointed former France coach Raymond Domenech as their new manager until the end of the season. Domenech last managed France during the 2010 World Cup, where they crashed out in the first round. He also led France to the 2006 World Cup final, where they lost to Italy on penalties. The 68-year-old replaces Christian Gourcuff, who was sacked earlier this month after a string of poor results. Nantes are 16th in the standings with 15 points, 3 above the relegation zone after 17 games. The next host fourth place Rennes on January 6th. Now, Pakistan trail New Zealand by 401 runs at the end of day 2 of the first test at the Bay Oval in Mount Maunganui. The Wizards ended day 2 at 30 for 1 after losing their opener Shan Masood for just 10 runs. Abid Ali is still on the crease at 19 along with Mohammad Abbas. Earlier, New Zealand were bowled out for 431 with Kane Williamson top scoring with 129 runs. Shaheen Shah was the pick of the bowlers for his 4 for 109 runs, while Yasir Shah took 3 wickets for 113 runs. This is the first test of the 2-match series, with the second slated for 3rd of January at Hagley Oval in Christchurch. Still in cricket, India lead Australia by 82 runs in the second test of the 4-match series. The visitors were 277 for 5 at the end of day 2 at Melbourne Cricket Ground. Skipper Ajinkya Rahane is still on the crease at 104 along with Ravindra Jadeja playing on 40. Earlier, Australia were bowled out for 195 after electing to bat first. Marnus top scored with 48, while Jasprit Bumrah sent 4 batsmen back to the pavilion. Australia are 1-0 up in the 4-match test series after winning the first test by 8 wickets. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. With the weather update, we come to the end of this bulletin. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News. Take care.